The time has finally come to get hands-on with the Amiga 3000, a fantasy machine that I've wanted in the museum for a very long time. Here it is in situ for all of our visitors to use, and for me to sit down and use for the first time proper without thinking about, well, hopefully without thinking about having to repair anything. Hopefully nothing will go pop today. To test drive it, to see what it was about. And well, I'm slightly nervous actually, because I want to see if it lives up to expectations, because I probably have built this machine up in my mind to be the perfect Amiga over the decades, so it does carry a weight of expectation with me. So there's two things I want to figure out in today's video. The first will come from simply using the machine, so sit down and use it with me in isolation. What's it like as a computer to use in its own right? Fine, we can do that. But the next thing is a little bit more difficult, and I've got a stack of magazines to help us get through that and more besides, and a big mug of coffee behind me. And that is, where does the Amiga 3000 sit in the context of the day? In 1990, when it came out, and the buzzword was multimedia, and the Amiga had a reputation for being a multimedia PC, thanks to what it achieved in the 80s with the original Amiga, its custom chips and everything it stood for. But where did the 3000 then sit when the likes of Apple and IBM PC compatibles were really pushing down that multimedia door? How does it stand up to the competition? How was it set for the future? You know, this is the start of a new decade. Where did the 3000 sit, and was it ready for that decade? And well, a lot more beside. I hope we'll find that out when I've done some reading. So I've got an Amiga, I've got a coffee, I've got some magazines. Let's see what the 3000 is all about, shall we? And just before I turn it on, the most observant of you will have noticed this Commodore sticker curling up on the monitor. The Commodore Ranger monitor. Of course, it's not made by Commodore at all. It's an MS-1500. That's Commodore's idea of rebranding. And the reason we took it off was to scan it, because Dan has made us a lovely new white one, as it should be. Let's stick that on there, hopefully straight. Yeah, that looks good. The Commodore Ranger is as good as new, kind of. Let's turn this on. Just like any other Amiga with a hard disk in, although we're using a compact flash adapter in here. Look how quickly it boots up. That was my first observation when I switched to IBM PC compatibles, was why the hell does this thing take so long to load? Just to get into DOS, let alone Windows. And Amigas are so nice and quick to get into. Which is useful when the Amiga crashes, which it can do quite often depending on what you're doing. Anyway, I've set this up, the hard drive up on this, like I do most of my Amigas with hard disks. Got a games folder with WHD load and tiny launcher and a big old library of games. But we do need to be careful when we test this, that I don't slip into the trap of just playing a load of games, because this was the new big box Amiga in town. This was the Amiga to replace the 2000 and the 2500, and it was all about productivity and enjoying productivity with the higher resolution 31 kilohertz screen and the scan doubler. So we will look at a lot of apps today and not too many games. That's my intention. I'll try. The work partition is just Workbench and a few other tools there. And we are using Workbench 2.04, released in 1991. So a few tweaks and fixes compared to just 2.0. And it's a typical kind of setup that you would have used with your 3000 back in the day. So let's start with a speed test, really, to see where this sits in the Amiga range. And I will use Sysinfo for that, once I can find it. There it is.
Previously on PCBWay.com, one man's attempt to start a revolution trips him up. You may look at this and see a man with egg on his face, and that egg is tarmac. But to PCBWay.com, they don't see failure, they see a project that needs their specialist skills and services to get it back on its feet. From PCB design and manufacture to CNC milling and 3D printing, from injection molding to sheet metal fabrication, let PCBWay.com catch you tripping. And don't let not having PCBWay.com on your team be your downfall. Yeah, it was okay. Thank you to everyone who asked last week.
So it is faster than an Amiga 600, I would hope so, but the 600 hadn't even come out at this point anyway. Faster than a stock 7 megahertz 2000, faster than a stock Amiga 1200. Again, that hadn't come out yet, but it was a cheaper wedge Amiga when it did come out, so you would hope this would be faster. Faster than a 14 megahertz 68020 2500. Not as fast as the 25 megahertz 3000, of course, and well, nowhere near as fast as a 68040 Amiga 4000. Very much a stock 3000. So we're going to get a authentic experience of using this. Let's quit out of that. The beauty of Amber, of course, is the scan doubling and the different screen modes that we can use. Let's see what we've got here. High res interlaced, 640 by 512 with 16 colors. Let's give that a go. Oh, I've got an error. Could not find screen mode.prefs. I've obviously not set my hard drive up very well. What if I just save it? No. Okay, it's working now. It didn't like the fact that Tiny Launcher was automatically launching when Workbench opened, and it wasn't giving the screen mode file time to do whatever it needed to do. So I just disabled the automatic launching of Tiny Launcher, and now I can rotate through the various default screen resolutions here. That's not a great one. There we go, that one's okay. That's a 640 by 512 with 4 colors. I think let's knock it up to 16 and see what it does. Yeah, it doesn't mind that. So here we are, 640 by 512 with 16 colors, de-interlaced by the flicker fixer. The refresh rate is low enough for me to see on the screen, but it's better than it would be if it was still coming through as fully interlaced. What did I have it on before? Well, let's try this, 1280 by 512. That only lets us go up to 4 colors. Oof. Yeah, I think I need a better monitor to handle that, but it's possible in 1990 to have a 1280 by 512 4 color mode out the box. Well, that's pretty impressive. I'm just going to stick with high res though. And I do want the colors. High res, 16 colors, please. There we go. That icon there has some color, so we know we're in 16 colors. Let's check out some applications. This is a cool example. This is Page Setter 3, a desktop publishing package, and I'm navigating the page over here, and you can see when I change the time it takes to refresh the screen on the stock 3000. But it's a nice WYSIWYG desktop publishing package. I would have been pretty impressed with that in the day, and it's nice that it's using the high resolution mode without flickering. That's quite nice. This is Final Writer, which is another word processor with all the things you'd expect, but this is running again in a high resolution screen mode. What would its competition be at the time? I guess Microsoft Word was around. Ami Pro. This is Imagine, a 3D modeling package, which I remember getting a free version of on the cover disk of Amiga format back in the day and struggling along with it on my A500, so it's nice to try it on something a bit more powerful. Did you know Amigas were used in the original series of Babylon 5? We do have a progress bar, 21% up there. It's by no means a 3D rendering workstation, that's for sure. I mean, it's quicker than my A500 was, obviously, but this is not raw power. Oh, here it comes. Look at that. Perfect. Ship it, broadcast it. That's another episode of Babylon 5 done. My first impression of driving the 3000 then was, well, very familiar, very much like any other Amiga I've used. It was nice to use applications that supported the higher resolutions, to see more of a page in something like Page Setter, doing some desktop publishing there, or just basic word processors or spreadsheets. They didn't all support higher resolutions. They all felt a small speed bump in that 16 megahertz mode, but this was not a machine that was delivering raw speed to me. I think the right word is probably cohesion. It was feeling like a more cohesive Amiga experience. It feels like a deliberately well-rounded Amiga experience. I've not installed a single add-on card in this machine, and it's just doing everything that it would out of the box in 1990. The speed of the stock 16 megahertz system, not earth-shattering then, but the convenience of what's built into the machine and what otherwise would need to have been bought as extras on earlier models like the 2000 feels like a more intentional build than the 2000. Things like a SCSI interface and that scan doubler being on board. High resolution, flicker-free Workbench modes just there to enjoy. And Workbench 2 moves the Amiga experience away from the bright blue and orange colour scheme of earlier systems, which were chosen to make it readable on low-cost TVs. The greys and the blues, which of course you can customise, but out of the box it feels more professional. And it's worth remembering that Microsoft Windows 3 only came out 1 month before the 3000 was launched with Workbench 2. So this refreshed OS makes the Amiga feel more mature on the software side and again brings everything together as a nice package. And we'll use the system a lot more, but 1990 was a very competitive world in the personal computing world. So let's have a look at some of these magazines and put the Amiga into some context. And this magazine here seems like as good a place as any to start. It's January 1990, so the 3000 isn't out yet. It's Byte magazine, and they are awarding their 1989 Computer of the Year award to the Apple Macintosh II CI. Now that's a 25 MHz 68030 base system with 4 meg of RAM, expandable up to 32, and that retailed at $6,269 about £4,000. Around about this time, Intel's 486 processor had entered the market. While not yet widespread in consumer systems, it represented a clear direction of travel in the IBM PC compatibles. And early 486 machines like this one from Cheetah are discussed with Cheetah's president, who says that he promises to keep prices as low as possible. Their upcoming 25 MHz 486 PC will be $4,995. And at the lower end, they've got a 286 based IBM PC compatible from PowerFlex, and that's approximately $1,500. So this demonstrates the breadth of the market at the time, from entry-level business machines to the high end. Commodore's absence from Byte's 1989 awards are notable, really. There's no hardware, there's no software on the platform picked that is award-worthy. It just doesn't exist in the awards. However, if we turn now to the February 1990 issue, Byte turns its attention to the concept of multimedia, a term that, while emerging in the wider industry, was already well understood within the Amiga community. The article explicitly references the Amiga, which was later renamed to the Amiga 1000. It references it as an early realization of this multimedia concept, highlighting its ability to combine graphics, audio, and video in a single system. The Amiga is often called the first multimedia computer, and for good reason. It also talks about the Amiga's strength in video production, particularly its ability to synchronize precisely with broadcast standards, NTSC and PAL. It's this marriage of images, sound, text, and video processing that they consider to be multimedia, and the article does a good job of cutting through the nonsense buzzwords and figuring out what the future might look like as multimedia is embraced by all the big players. So the 3000 landed in June 1990, and sticking to Byte magazine rather than an Amiga-centric publication, perhaps it will give us a bit more balance, it's no surprise that the article is titled "Commodore Sets Course for Multimedia." And the front page headline, interestingly, is "Mainstream Amiga." Like Cinderella going to the ball, it's all the little Amiga ever dreamed of being called: mainstream. And in reviewing the new system, Byte uses a word that until now has rarely been associated with the Amiga range or Commodore: focus. Commodore, it says, has finally defined a focus for the Amiga line and staked its claim for the emerging multimedia market. This could be a pivotal moment for Commodore and a chance to reposition the platform, to move it from a somewhat fragmented identity that's often dismissed by the Apple and PC crowd and steer it towards a much more clearly defined role in the multimedia pecking order. They make a direct comparison to the Byte award-winning Apple II CI, and Commodore's $3,495 price tag for the 16 MHz model, a shade under $4,000 for the 25 MHz model, is $3,000 less than a comparatively equipped Apple computer. That is a huge saving. Byte is impressed that it's the first native 32-bit Amiga computer, that it's introduced the 32-bit Zorro 3 expansion slots, and that it's backwards compatible with older Zorro 2 peripherals used in the 2000. They note that the 3000 has enjoyed some minor enhancements to the custom chips, which increases some of the resolutions available and extra memory here and there, and that it's fully compatible with the growing range of existing Amiga software.
However, the review also highlights ongoing limitations. The absence of native 24-bit color is identified as a significant constraint for future multimedia applications. Additionally, there is an acknowledgement that while the chipset has been refined, it does remain fundamentally rooted in its 1985 design. Despite these concerns, Byte goes on to conclude that with the Amiga 3000, it has produced the most capable multimedia platform that you can get in a single box. And I think Commodore should be pretty happy from that assessment from Byte. It's a big magazine in the US, it's got the Amiga 3000 right there on the front cover, and it's singing its praises. But what about in the UK press? Let's take a look at some magazines that are closer to home for me. We don't have a full review of the 3000 like Byte has, just a small news snippet really, which says, contrary to popular belief, Commodore have totally redesigned many aspects of the machine, and that Commodore are aiming at the low-end workstation market previously dominated by such big names as Sun and Apollo. It also says that the base 16 MHz system with a 40 meg hard drive will come in at £2,500. And then in August, it's as if the clock strikes midnight and our 3000 turns back into a pumpkin in the eyes of the UK press, because now it's all about the CD-TV. An Amiga 500 repackaged as a hi-fi separate with a CD-ROM drive. This is the consumer-facing embodiment of multimedia, a device designed to compete with the likes of Philips CDI, and a device that really does nothing to progress the Amiga platform's future prospects. But given the coverage it's getting across all of the Amiga magazines at this time, it seems to be the thing that Commodore wants everyone to push. In the ensuing months of CD-TV coverage, I can't for the life of me find a detailed review of the 3000 in Amiga format. The next we hear of it is in April of 1991 with news about the launch of a Unix model A3000, which we'll come to later. And the first advert I come across where you can actually buy it in the UK in Amiga format shows up as late as September 1991, where it says the new Amiga 3000 will set you back £2,395 for the 25 MHz version, or £2,595 with a monitor. This is 15 months after the US launch, and it's being called new in the UK. Where have you been? Where have you been? Amiga Computing magazine, on the other hand, does run a preview in July 1990, which spends considerable time covering the new look and the features of the new Workbench 2 operating system, but there was still nowhere to buy it. This delayed and subdued presence of the 3000 suggests that in the UK at least, the Amiga 3000 never fully established itself in the way that Commodore may have intended, or perhaps Commodore just wasn't that bothered. Returning to using the machine itself now, this historical context becomes increasingly relevant. The Amiga 3000 does not present itself as a forward-looking or experimental system. Instead, it feels like, as we said before, a refinement of existing ideas. The new operating system is better, the hardware is more integrated, but it doesn't redefine what multimedia is. By 1990, the broader industry had begun to close the gap in areas where the Amiga had previously held a clear advantage. Graphics, audio, and video capabilities were improving rapidly across competing platforms. Things like VGA being adopted as the standard with 256 colours on screen for PCs, and Adlib and then Sound Blaster becoming the standard sound card interface, or clones of the Sound Blaster, bringing all of these multimedia capabilities to a level where they were considered so standard that every piece of software supported them. The Amiga 3000 then occupies an odd position in that it's the peak expression of what the original Amiga idea was trying to be, at the very time that its special sauce is no longer special, no longer unique. The Apples and the PCs of the world have found the recipe. Of course, though, the base configuration of the system is only part of the story. These things are upgradable. Just like the Amiga 2000, the 3000 has a processor upgrade slot, and a range of options were available from Commodore and other vendors. So I've had a dig through the inventory, and I found this. This is a GVP T-Rex. It's a 68040, it's either 33 or 40 megahertz. We'll find out when we put it in there because there's a fan over the chip. I can't tell you exactly what's in there. And a chunk of RAM. It could be used by the 3000 and then later the 4000. This actually came out in 1994, this board, so more likely to have been bought for a 4000 at the time, but it would have bumped the price up significantly. More power.
Let's put it in and see what difference it makes. That 68040 has a fan, but it's going to get hot in there. So I've just got a modern twin fan GPU cooler, which will sit in the expansion bay here. I'm only running it on the 5 volts, so it'll spin at a low RPM, and it is directly above that very expensive to replace amber chip. So that should get the air flowing nicely around the case. It's not going to add to the performance. I'm just thinking about the longevity of the machine here. Cool chips last longer, and that's all I'm thinking about. And I did also quickly swap out the fan in the PSU. It was a bit noisy, very old bearings, so it was a no-brainer to swap it out really. Good old Amigas. Right, let's run Sysinfo and see what difference this has made. Start with the speed. Oh, look at the power. Numero uno. And we can see just from raw power here, raw processing power, we are faster than a 25 megahertz 68030 Amiga 3000 by a long shot. A huge amount faster than the stock 25 megahertz 3000, and well, faster than the Amiga 4000 68040. And memory wise, what have we got in there? We have got, okay, we've got 8 meg expansion memory, so that must be 2 4 meg sims on the CPU card, 4 meg locally, 2 meg chip RAM. Oh, so what difference does this make? This thing is flying now. Every application I use is just snappier. And yes, I will play some games. F18 Interceptor, smoother frame rate. The age-old benchmark of the Amiga, Frontier Elite, the intro sequence, lovely and smooth. My fantasy Amiga 3000 is now a turbocharged ultimate Amiga 3000 with all that extra horsepower. It's wonderful to use, but it doesn't fundamentally change what it is, and it's not unique to an Amiga to be able to strap on some extra RAM and a faster CPU to it. Even with all the extra power in here, what this Amiga 3000 doesn't feel like is an unknown quantity. It doesn't feel like it has that certain amount of mystery or magic that the original Amiga 1000 had back in the day. It doesn't feel like there's untapped potential. It's a known quantity. We know what it's capable of. We know we can add some more raw horsepower in there and do these things quicker. It's lacking the magic of the early Amigas. Even the Amiga 500 felt like it had a certain amount of magic to it that it was just mysterious because it hadn't been tapped into by a lot of the developers at that point. They hadn't figured out how to use the custom chips cohesively in parallel to get the most out of the machines at that point. So the 3000, as lovely as it is, does feel like a known quantity. But what if it could have had that magic? What if the 3000 might have been something more? Okay, it gets fun here because there isn't just one what if, there are several overlapping futures that Commodore was toying with the 3000. These include the AAA, the AA3000 and the 3000 Plus. And one thread of the story is also the Unix workstation, which did come to fruition. In the original 3000 preview, for example, Amiga Format said, although this machine does not utilize the 68040 as many expected it would, well, ours does now, it features a special processor expansion slot for more powerful processors, including the 68040, and a RISC processor. A RISC processor? Did you hear that, little Archimedes? Nearly had a RISC processor. And it's also reported that Sun Microsystems had planned to use a Unix variant of the A3000 as an OEM box and their answer to low-end Unix machines, complementing their high-performance SPARC range. But that didn't happen. The 3000 UX was released though by Commodore in 1991, so a Unix workstation variant does exist. And in April 1991, Amiga Format referenced Byte magazine as having had a sneak preview. Yes, the biggest selling Amiga magazine has to read a US magazine to get news on the 3000 because Commodore doesn't appear to have supplied Amiga Format with their own one. Get with the program, Commodore. Byte said, when you put it beside a Next, Macintosh or a 386 workstation, the differences are in favour of the Amiga. It's an obvious choice for a low-end workstation. And it's possible that what Commodore was planning for the 3000 was a Motorola M88K CPU, That was the RISC successor to the 68000 CPU. It also gets a mention in Amiga Computing magazine, who speculate that the Amiga 3000 is to be kind of a bridge from the Amiga as we know it to a RISC-based successor, and that will advance the whole Amiga platform forward. The details are thin on the ground. And then there's the AA3000 and the 3000 Plus, and information on these are very limited. But what we do know is that the 3000 Plus was a second generation of the 3000, which did reach a working state in 1991, and was the first computer to be based on the Pandora chipset, which would later be called AGA, or the Amiga Advanced Graphics Architecture.
I started working on a thing we called the Amiga 3000 Plus, which was the first debut of what we called at the time the Pandora chips, which later got dubbed the AA chips internally because we had been previously working on the AAA chips, the Advanced Amiga Architecture, which was one that didn't actually do anything until about 1993. And then the marketing people dubbed it AGA because it sounded like VGA. The 3000 Plus was booting Amiga OS in February of 1991. It was taking a while to get the software up and running to exploit all the regular stuff, but I had actually had the thing in the lab, and I had hand coded some demos that used the 256 colors and the other stuff you could do with it just to show that it worked. So yeah, it had been ready. It was a weird situation where the hardware was actually ready like a long time before the software had gotten up and running. It wasn't actually that problematic. It kind of just worked.
This would give the Amiga the 24-bit graphics mode as standard, so desired by Byte's earlier article, a 16.7 million color palette with 256 colors on screen. The AA and 3000 Plus project was intended to take all the best bits of the 3000, but make it a much more forward-looking machine that would include some of these lovely features on the screen here. There's so many of them, I'll just scroll them on the screen. The most exciting of which is perhaps that DSP coprocessor. The full details can be read in a 1991 document by Commodore engineer Dave Haney, which I'll include a link to for our really techie friends. It's reported that 50 of these enhanced 3000 Plus machines were made and the design was fully working, but Commodore would go on to destroy nearly all of them. A surviving prototype PCB has now been documented and recreated though, so you can make your own brand new 3000 Plus, and software has been written to take advantage of the DSP chip. For example, in an A3000 Plus you can natively play MP3 music thanks to the DSP processor while the CPU goes about its business in parallel. But these developments built on the 3000 after it had already arrived. There was also another project that preceded the 3000, the AAA or Advanced Amiga Architecture, and it's said that this was in development from around 1987-1988. The goal of AAA was to make a massive leap from the original Amiga chipset to something completely new. Something to compete with the SGI workstations and the high-end PCs, and this again may tie in with those earlier reports of RISC cards and bridging the gap between the old and the new Amiga architecture. The improvements are impressive and too numerous to list here, but again I will include a link if you want to read through them. It would have been a very different, very powerful Amiga. It's easy to put it on paper though, more difficult to produce it because AAA was one of those things that was always just around the corner and never quite arriving. AAA is perhaps Commodore's biggest what-if story as it relates to the 3000. What might a AAA 3000 have delivered for Commodore in 1990 at this critical juncture in personal computing? It's a deep rabbit hole, I can tell you. And most telling of all, I think, is in August 1992 in Amiga format, where we see Amiga 2000 replacement could feature new multimedia chip. Now this is the news of a potential new Amiga. You would have thought the 3000 might be the 2000 replacement, but that's not the case. Over the 2 years since the 3000 was released, the Amiga 2000 simply went from strength to strength. The next generation Amiga that we got was the A1200, A4000 and CD32 console, which still felt like they fell short of that AAA specification dating back to the late 80s. And while we didn't get the AAA 3000 in 1990, Commodore did give us the Commodore GS, a games console based on their 1982 Commodore 64 Micro. In 1990, are you keeping up with the Commodore? What do we make of the 3000 then? Well, having test driven it, and I will continue to use it an awful lot, it's not a revolutionary machine. It doesn't redefine what the Amiga is. It's not a huge technological leap. Yes, you could match the performance of a 3000 using an Amiga 2000 and a bunch of add-on cards. It wasn't a killer upgrade for existing owners, and they weren't compelled to switch over to it, which is perhaps why there wasn't a big outcry in the UK when it took a while to arrive. Everyone was pretty happy with their 2000s, and Commodore was banging on about the CD-TV to scratch that multimedia itch. Commodore would give us the AGA chipset in 1992, and that would appear in the Amiga 4000, and then the 1200 and the CD32, but the fabled AAA never materialized. I'm very fond of this pumpkin, even if it has gone past midnight. If I had to pick an Amiga that packs the most Amiga-ness into an Amiga, it's got to be this one. It's such a nice package. I'm not going to be sad about alternative Commodore timelines, what Amiga might have been, what the AAA might have represented. I'm just happy that this thing exists and gives me the Amiga that I remember, in the form of my Amiga 500 that I had, in such a complete and well-refined package. It is, for me, the ultimate Amiga, and I would encourage anyone to sit down and give this thing a go wherever you can, and you can do right here at the Retro Collective. If you want to come and try it out, go to retrocollective.co.uk. We're open most weekends, and we've also got special guest speaker events you can come and enjoy. So do come and visit, do come and try out the 3000. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Did you have one? Is there something specific I should try out on this machine to really show it off? Is it all right to play games on it? Yeah. That's exactly what I'm going to do right now. Lots and lots of games with super quick loading times and glorious Amiga stereo separation and everything else that comes with the Amiga. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, and take care. Bye-bye. So much Amiga.